Welcome to the Cyber Rants Podcast, where we're all about sharing the forbidden secrets and slightly embellished truths about corporate cybersecurity programs. We're ranting, we're raving, and we're telling you the stuff that nobody talks about on their fancy website and trade show giveaways, all to protect you from cybersecurity criminals. And now, here's your hosts, Mike Rotondo, Zach Fuller, and Lauro Chavez.
Hello and welcome to the Cyber Rants Podcast. This is your co-host Zach Fuller, joined by Lauro Chavez and Mike Rotondo. And this is an interesting episode today. Before we dive into this topic that I am particularly excited to talk about, let's kick off with the news. Mike?
Good morning and welcome to Podcast in 2021. These are your headlines for the week, brought to you today from the Slap and Scratch Inn in Mobile, Alabama. Mobile, the place to be. A new software supply chain attack targeted millions with spyware. There's another one that's piggybacking on the SolarWinds, so enjoy. It's hitting Androids, PCs, Macs. It's based on a Android emulator. Enjoy. Google discloses a severe flaw in widely used libgcrypt encryption library. That's a hard one to say. It's a heap buffer overflow that will go ahead and decrypt your data. WordPress pop-up builder plugin flaw plagues 200,000 sites. So there's another WordPress issue out there. I definitely tell you to look into it if you have a WordPress site. Malicious actors reserving their cyber attacks for the hospitality industry. So what they're doing is they're hitting the cyber industry or the hospitality industry with cyber attacks, stealing guest data. And this is becoming a bigger problem because more people are going to biometrics or faster ways to check in. So there's less interaction with staff. It's more electronic. So when you lose your room key, there's a way around that. And now that stuff is that chain is being broken. I love this one. Malicious script steals credit card info stolen by other hackers. Yep, they are piggybacking on other hackers' work to steal credit cards that they're already stealing on their own. So it's hackers being hacked by the hackers to steal credit cards.
No honor between these people.
No, not at all.
No honor between thieves or pirates.
I guess so. I guess not. It's crazy.
Linux malware backdoor supercomputers. Yep, that supercomputer is no longer safe. There's now a malware called Kobolos that will allow you to create terminals and will break into AIX and other high-end systems. So got that going for us. Ransomware operators exploit VMware ESXi flaws to encrypt disks of VM. There's a lot of ESX issues out there. Please patch them. But because everybody seems to forget that the ESX host is vulnerable, just like the VMs are. Over a dozen Chrome extensions caught hijacking Google search results for millions. Google Chrome extensions have been backdoored, being manipulated. From the Let's All Be Unified point of view, Microsoft Defender ATP is detecting yesterday's Chrome update as a backdoor. Obviously, that's an issue. Make sure you update your Chrome. And then for us Mac users, recent root giving pseudo bug also impacts Mac OS. That's the CVE 2021-3156. So Macs are now vulnerable to this. Threat actors capitalize on COVID-19 vaccine news to run campaigns. AWS is abused to host malicious PDFs. There's a lot of bad stuff out there. This isn't nice. Once again, AWS is being victimized. In this kind of nice enhancement, Microsoft Defender now detects Mac OS system app vulnerabilities. So if you are running Mac OS, have co-loaded it with Windows OS or somehow running it together, the Windows Defender will work with you on that one. So that's all for the headlines, guys.
Cool. Thanks for that, Mike. To kind of add on to some of that with the exploits this week, the pseudo they're calling Baron Sem did it was featured by Fantastic Hacker, and that's available for download into Metasploit. So that exploit's available right now in two parts. It requires a little ratchetry to get it to work, but it is available. So keep that in mind. Make sure that you're treating that pseudo stuff pretty seriously. Another thing that I think is interesting to see is that a recent kind of newcomer author to the market has brought 6 Solaris 10 privilege escalation vulnerabilities that work in various versions of Solaris 10.1.13. So it's certainly an older version of Solaris, but a lot of organizations are still using those older versions of Spark because they work. So I think that's kind of interesting. And then to tag on to what Mike was saying about WordPress 5.0 image remote code execution is available as an exploit plugin in PHP for Metasploit. So again, if you've got WordPress running, make sure that you're getting those modules updated so that you're not vulnerable to this IRC. And that's it for exploits. Keep patching.
Great, thank you both. Interesting times that we're in these days. A lot is happening out there, and really for the topic of today's discussion, it's certainly a valid one, I think, and it's a question that I think a lot of us ask on a regular basis, and that question is, are we losing the cybersecurity war that's out there, and or what is our status in this kind of worldwide battle of the giants, but then also the small and medium-sized threat actors? I mean, everybody's kind of in this together. Everybody's seemingly against each other, like you just talked about, Mike. Hackers hacking hackers, right? It's kind of the Wild West out there, and so the big question is: Are we losing the war on cybersecurity? And a recent report discussed in detail the Chinese, military-backed hackers going in and going after consumer credit agencies, large corporations and small, the DoD supply chain, all of that. The Chinese nation state-backed hackers basically are coming up over and over and over again. And so we're in this continuous warfare, cyber warfare, really, right? And we have to ask, where do we stand in all this? And in my opinion, we have a lot more to do, and this is something that we're not going to conquer overnight. And I don't know if there is a end all be all or some definitive end to all of this. It could certainly be a long-term war of attrition, right? Kind of like the war on terror, right? Or the war on drugs. I mean, it's just it's something where I don't know if there actually is an end state, but the idea in my mind is really to subdue it as much as possible and protect ourselves as much as possible. What do you guys think? Where do we stand today, this day and age?
I don't think we're losing. I think we've got a long way to go to determine a winner or loser in this specific epic battle, right? We're certainly at a disadvantage now. I think my reason for thinking that is kind of twofold. The first part is really just because of I think it's a different culture in the United States. Most of the youth and most of the populace here leverage technology for leisure. Cybersecurity and the technology, I guess, core of job families isn't something, or that profession or even as a hobby isn't just something that occurs to them, right? They're very good users. The rest of the stuff doesn't really matter to them. And the other second part is that the fabric of what we know as the Internet of Everything today wasn't built on security. It was fabricated in the method to share data. It was meant to be a public library of sorts. And so because of that kind of, I guess, off-footed approach to building what we know today as, the Internet of Everything, unfortunately, we're in a race to resolve mistakes that we made early on that we didn't see. So we're kind of doing both, right? We're trying to fix at all times the things that are not in place for what we consider to be a cybersecurity configuration, right? That could be abused. And two, we have a populace that is not kind of driven towards that heavy use of technology from an engineering perspective that other countries do, and that are just kind of users of the tech versus engineers of the tech, which I think we kind of see in greater populace. More hackers come out of other countries than come out of the United States, I guess is an easy way to say it.
And the irony of that is that most of the hacks that are being used have been developed in the U.S.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
It's just a strange dichotomy, right? I mean, I think it's the U.S. is primarily a consumer class, right? We're consumers. We're not. Life has been very easy and soft for us for the last 50 years or so, or however long, or whatever your point of view happens to be. So we tend to take these things as, these great blessings that have made our lives easier without ever considering the options of that. And I tell people all the time, it's like everything that makes your iPhone easier to use or your computer easier to log in makes it easier for us to break into. And they just that they don't always connect the dots on that.
Yeah, and it comes down. I think that you're right. We've had a relative level of comfort in our country compared to elsewhere in the world that really just scraping to get by, and it's very, very hard for them to get ahead. So it's almost not an option to even create new technologies or new methods. But they can certainly steal ours, right, and use it against us. So it's kind of a sad situation. And also, I think, comes down to values within different countries. So, with China, for instance, their government it's run much differently, and their government fully believes that there should be visibility on everything and going on at all times. There shouldn't really be things like privacy, right? And very much free will. They're very much focused on monitoring everything going on, including their own people, right? But the other side of it is that we also have the intelligence operations that have been going on forever, really, since before our country was even a country, right? We have these intelligence operations going on, and so now the cyber warfare is an extension of that. That's another piece of it, right? Like when the Office of Personnel Management attack happened, right? Unfortunately, that resulted in a lot of our intelligence operators overseas getting killed. It's just there's no way to sugarcoat it. That's what happened, and it's because that data is being used not just for ransomware and collecting payments and that sort of thing. That's a huge piece of it, right? Financial gain, but the other piece of it is actual physical attacks, physical war, and this kind of cat and mouse game within the intelligence community. So they're looking at this as really a means of survival. I know a lot of the threat actors they operate out of a survival mentality, where I like to think, here in the U.S. we're much more focused on a mentality of growth and hoping to work toward peace and such, but not everybody thinks that way. So I think the very root of this even boils down to culture and values within companies and how people were brought up, and not necessarily at a fault of their own, right? It's very much a product of their environment in a lot of cases. So stealing from other countries, or war of attrition, to them that's just life. It's not something that's wrong or good or bad. It just is, unfortunately.
Right. It comes down to survival, and I think there's two things that I want to touch on. First, the American business model is to make money, right? It's capitalism. We're driving the share price. We're driving, maximizing profit. And security costs money. And you don't 100% see a direct correlation between profit and security. Although I think there was some cybersecurity company called Silent Sector that came up with the risk to revenue model, but we'll talk about that another time. But anyway, we do you see that, and we see it all the time in our conversations with companies. That costs too much, or we don't want to do that, or we can't afford the security guy, or we can't do that. And, they fail to understand that it costs 4 to 10 times to fix a breach than it would be to put the resources in place to prevent a breach. And this drive of making profit, and don't get me wrong, I love profit. I like making money, but you have to take into account the risks that are out there. So countries like China have more of a holistic view where it's for the company, whereas in the US China is more for the country, whereas the US is more for individual companies, and there's no true standard. And China has then now taken and weaponized technology as a means of control. They're creating a social credit score based on your social posts, or social media posts, how your spending habits are, what on and on and on, and all these various factors. And they're using that to determine what apartment you can get, what job you can get, whether you can get a loan or not, et cetera, et cetera. And it's becoming a control factor, which, used to have to happen by, KGB agents sneaking around corners. Now they just do it by eavesdropping on social media. And what's concerning is the U.S. moving to that? Because there seems to be a whole lot of cancellation on social media of people that do not adhere to the dominant paradigm of the day, the dominant message of the day. And it's, free speech is under attack, from all ends. So that's my soapbox.
That was a good soapbox. I like that that stealthy little plug you jabbed in there. That was brilliant, sir.
Yeah. I like that Sponsor company. They're pretty good.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I hope, and I think this is a problem of these are all problems that I think have stemmed out of something that's good by nature, right? Technology just is, right? It can be used for good or it can be used as a weapon, right? It really comes down to the human element behind it, and the societal values. A lot of different factors go into this, but we certainly can't blame technology as being the problem. I think the big picture is how do we create a culture that understands the fight that's in a lot of other cultures, right? And understand how to protect ourselves, how to drive forward, and then hopefully use technology to come together as a world, not split apart. And I won't get all soft and mushy on us here, but when we talk about culture, we look at things like the app TikTok, for example, right? It's clear that it's Chinese entities and government are using this as surveillance software, right, and collect data on people. And it's not even so much about just having the data on people that scares me. It's the predictive algorithms that they create. These AI based methods of
precognitive crime.
Right,
it's like a sci-fi movie.
Yeah, what's that movie?
Minority Report.
Minority Report. Yeah, thank you. It's like a real life world, or a real life version of that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But the thing that scares me the most is not that TikTok is being used as Chinese surveillance. The thing that scares me is that our youth doesn't care. They say, "Oh well, who cares if these other large governments that have ability to do a lot of good or cause a lot of harm in the world, have all this." They're almost just not wanting to hear it because the endorphins that these apps create for them and that the addiction that they create is something that they're not willing to let go of. And that's the scariest thing to me. It's not. It's just the.
It is a drug. I think you bring up a good point, and it's probably a great topic to have another type. But you're right. There's certain things in the brain that are happening when individuals are using these apps, and it becomes an addiction. The infinite scroll, right, is for a reason. It's so that it never ends. It can never end for you if you want it to, right? You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So it's super interesting.
Well, I can't remember the guy that came out, with a Facebook engineer that came out. So this is all about driving dopamine, right? It's
totally.
Huh?
Yeah, totally. I know you're talking about. I can't remember either, but it is. It's a version of a fix from a drug. And when you've got artificial intelligence, and it's weird because the Chinese, we know they have all the intelligence on their own people already, right? They're running this weird social scoring system that's going on. If it's out of a sci-fi movie too, they did an episode of that on that. Oh, I can't remember that sci-fi movie. that was on Netflix. But anyways, you go to a planet that's like completely driven. You have a score that you wear.
Oh no, that was from that Seth MacFarlane TV
That's
show.
right.
What was that called?
What the heck? Anyways, that Seth MacFarlane.
We can't
sci-fi.
remember anything today. We should.
It's you know what? I've only had 16 cups of coffee, so I've got to get to 20 before my memory starts really kicking in from that far back. But yes, they did an exact episode on that one. That's weird, right? The truth is stranger to the fiction. But I think the Chinese are bored. They have all the data that they got this really cool. I mean, I think they probably built this fantastic data center to do all this with us. AI is probably a marvel. Like I don't care. I mean, their purpose is bad, of course, but I'd still like to look at the technology. I imagine it's impressive, right? I imagine it's a sight to be seen. But they did all that, and now they've got everything there. What's next? Well, let's gobble up the rest of the world.
The Orville, that's the name of the show.
The Orville, thank you. Yes.
What happened to it? I think it's on Netflix now. But anyway.
But that episode, man, where they had to visit that planet where that, he made a snide remark and they were going to banish him, they were punishing him through their social system.
Yeah, and reprogram him. Yeah. Super
interesting that the lady couldn't order coffee because she didn't have enough, social clout, right, or whatever. She didn't have enough likes.
Exactly.
It's such a random, how random it applies, and that's exactly what the Chinese are doing. Almost like they watched that episode and was like, "That's a brilliant idea. Let's do that."
On the cyber warfare side of things, people ask, what does winning look like, right? How do we win? What do we do to get ahead of it? And that's an extremely hard thing to answer. I mean, winning looks like, world peace and everybody loves everybody, but what's the reality of that happening?
It's not going to happen, but winning for the United States and, in our kind of cyber battle would look like much like an organization that's successful at aligning to any given framework, right? Where the people are all trained, right? There's a cultural change inside of a corporation that has to occur, right? That everybody has software on the machines, right? There's certain things that they're made aware of, and what tactics and what software is vulnerable and shouldn't be used. And so we would have a cultural shift where all of the American youth and people, and it would be a massive effort, right, to educate the youth and educate the the elderly, to assist them in their homes and in their places of not a rest home, I guess what you call that, like sort of adult supervised living or whatever, assisted living. Yeah. But they're victims too, right? I mean, we've seen right here in local municipalities, these elderly people kill themselves because they fall victim to scams that have taken their last of their savings. So they're victims too, and I think it all starts with that education, right? That cultural shift. But that's what I think it would look like. It would look like a corporation that's been successful to aligning to like NIST 853, where and that part of the people specifically, right, where they're getting a training program, right, where free, or they're getting it on their own. They're updating their computer. They're not installing random apps. They're not letting kids do things. They're running in a user shell and not an admin shell, right, until they need to do something. I mean, there's but that's what I would think that would give us an advantage over, it would include companies, actually all organizations operating in the United States doing the right things too, software development, right? Making sure that they're eating their own medicine, right? These companies that are offering these, trusted software deployments that need to be running their stuff through bug bounty programs and initiating that type of security so that we have a more security culture. And I think that's probably where it would start, and that would fend off a lot of what's happening, I think.
Well, I remember a couple of years ago, there was actually a study done that most of these like pay apps that are out there, it was something only like 20% were actually tested for security. And they're still being launched and they're still being out there. I mean, and it's just this lack of accountability, right? Because really, what was the recourse if you got hacked? There really wasn't any until, was it Weston? I can't remember the bank, the hotel agency that got sued by the FCC because they had claimed they had all these security measures in place, got hacked, and it turns out they didn't have any of them. Mm-hmm. I really can't remember anything this morning either.
Weston.
There's been a lot of data to like chew through the past week. It's been a bit with stuff going on. So
I'm only on day 2 of my vacation, and so I'm assuming that by the time I return on Wednesday, I'm going to be done as a post. So, yeah.
Well, I think perfection is not the focus, no. Right? Or zero hacks, zero attacks, anything like that. I think that's just something that's going to continue to happen, unfortunately, like war itself, right? Like terrorism, like things like that we want to get rid of the world. I think that's going to continue to happen, but how do we minimize it? How do we mitigate it? I think that what we have to do as a nation, we have to make ourselves harder targets than those around us, so it becomes more and more costly to perform cyber attacks. Now, that's not going to stop the big, nation state backed threat actors, right? But that's going to stop a lot of the activity, and it's going to make it more costly for them. And by doing that, the more we protect ourselves, the more we can continue to innovate, continue to drive forward, get ahead, and not have that information stolen, and then hopefully use what we create out of that for good, and continue to grow and thrive, really, and then hopefully help others do the same, right? And so it's going to be one of these ongoing situations. But I think right now that we're failing to protect this nation from cyber attacks. There has to be done more. There's a lot of people working hard on it, but I think somehow we have to spread this message to the general public that's not in this business, that's not thinking about these things. I would venture to say that probably 99%, 95% of the nation's population, cybersecurity doesn't cross their mind for themselves personally, unless they see something on the news that happens, right? But probably day to day, people aren't really thinking about this at all. Kind of like you talked about earlier, Laro. So,
well, what's interesting is that as a country here in the United States, we have the Second Amendment, right, the right to bear arms, and so there's a lot of Americans that have weapons. Mm-hmm. So we're physically protected. You're certainly not want to start a land war here, but the same people that protect themselves physically have little to no protection in the cyberspace. So I think you're right. I think it starts with awareness.
Their default passwords on their routers, right?
Yeah.
So, well,
I also think that we need to start having real world consequences for hacks for these companies, because I can't tell you how many CIOs that I've spoken to. It's like, so our stock dips for a while, we'll be back, kind of thing, and they just don't have. There's no consequence for their lack of activity.
I agree 100%. And I also think that we should have real world consequences for foreign governments that don't regulate attacks coming from within their country, or even try to go after them. I mean, I'm not talking about go to war with them, but I'm talking about, whether we need trade embargoes or we need something that causes a little bit of, or creates an incentive for them to actually do something about it. Because a lot of nations are just letting it go without any consequence, whereas other crimes within their country they would penalize heavily. The cyber attacks are almost not taken seriously in a lot of places.
Yeah,
and I really think they should be. So this is a fascinating topic. We could go on and on, but we're coming up on time here. So just to recap, I think it really comes down to a cultural shift, to education, to focus on this, to really taking it more seriously as a nation than we ever have. I think people are starting to wake up in that sense. I think we're certainly headed in the right direction and working harder toward that than ever before. But there's a long way to go. So
make your kids spend an hour on Linux a day.
There you go.
Not playing video games.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for listening. Be sure to rate us on your favorite podcast platform. Let us know your thoughts, comments, questions, so we can answer those in future episodes, and always feel free to reach out. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
pick up your copy of the Cyber Rants book on Amazon today. And if you're looking to take your cybersecurity program to the next level, visit us online at www.silentsector.com. Join us next time for another edition of the Cyber Rants podcast.